course, we're in the middle of a story. We're right in the middle of a story towards the end of it, and we've spent the last 3 classes discussing the story and all the questions on the story. We're about to give an answer to a lot of the questions. So let's repeat the story. It's a very, very important story, and it casts David HaMelech in very bad light, the story, and we want to put David in a better light, right? For several reasons. Simply because we want to read his Tehillim and not be thinking about all the horrible things that David did in his life. Okay? And but there's other reasons as well which we'll discuss. So basically the story is that David's soldiers are out fighting against Ammon, and David is asleep in the afternoon in his palace. He wakes up in the afternoon and goes for a walk on the roof. Whilst he's going for a walk on the roof, he sees a woman who's bathing, and she is very beautiful. And he sends a message to find out who she is, because he can't see from that distance who she is, and finds out that it's none other than Sheva, who is the wife of Uriah Hitti, the daughter of Eliab. Okay. And David sends messengers to bring her to him, and she comes, and he sleeps with her. And then she goes home and finds out that she's pregnant. She sends a message to him and says, "I'm pregnant." And says, "Oh, what are we going to do now?" Right? Apparently they had both hoped that she wouldn't get pregnant. I'm not sure why, but that's what they'd hoped, right? Because they didn't use any contraceptive, so anyway, she became pregnant. So then they decide, it looks like, again, this is a little bit of interpretation, it looks like they're trying to cover it up, it seems very clear, and they call Uriah, who's out fighting, to come back from the front. And then he'll go home and he'll sleep with his wife, which would be normal, and then no one has to know, even though the baby looks a bit like David, but no one's going to even think, right? So therefore, it doesn't have to arouse any suspicion and cause any problems. Okay, but David brings him home, tells him to go home to his wife, and Uriah refuses to go home. So we interpreted that the way David spoke to Uriah made Uriah a bit suspicious. Okay? Because although it's hard to believe that Uriah would just refuse orders without any reason, right? Okay, so he's a bit suspicious, and he doesn't go home, he refuses to go home, and in the end, after David trying several days to get Uriah to go back home, he refuses, he doesn't go home, he sleeps like in the barracks of the palace with the other soldiers, and he just doesn't go. So David has no choice. Well,
I thought you slept on the steps of the, what do you call it?
Whatever, say that.
Quarters.
Yeah, you can't sleep on steps, that's
Okay.
you know, right? Whatever, it says he slept with the servants of David. What does that mean? It means whatever. The barracks, not in the barracks, whatever, but he didn't go home, that's the point. Okay? All right. So, what does he do now? David gives him a letter, sends him back to the front with a letter that Yoav should put Uriah is the head of his army, should put Uriah in a very dangerous position in the fighting, and hopefully he'll get killed, and that will solve the problem another way. How will that solve the problem? Well, really solve the problem, because still the baby's going to be born, and everyone's going to know, very suspicious, this married woman has a baby when her husband's out fighting. How did that happen? And he looks very much like a king, right? And there's a few people who do know the story, because the messengers who were sent to find out who she is, and the messengers to bring her, and the palace guards, and obviously a king can't do things without some people knowing, right? So there's always a risk that people will find out. Okay? So we suggested, again, it's not clear in the story, but it seems relatively simple, that David's plan is that if Uriah dies, David will marry her, and then they'll be able to cover it up that way. Because if he marries her very soon, and the baby is born 6 months after they get married, it doesn't have to arouse suspicion, and then no one has to know. The public doesn't have to know, right? And that worked. The Uriah was killed, and David then very quickly afterwards, shortly after he marries her, brings her into his house and he marries her. At that point, the prophet comes in, marches into David's house, and, well, he doesn't march in. He comes in and he tells him a story. Okay? He tells a whole story about these 2 guys, neighbors, one was rich, one was poor. The rich guy had lots of animals, and the poor guy had one small sheep that he brought up from being little, and he used to sleep with him and used to eat with him. And then one day the rich man had a visitor, and instead of giving one of his sheep to slaughter to eat for a meal for the rich guy, he stole the one from the poor guy and killed it. And David got so annoyed with that, David said he should put him to death for that, even though all he did was stole. But as we mentioned yesterday, the king has the right to judge based on the nastiness, the bad character traits, not only on the strict law of theft requiring you to pay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, 1, 2, 4, and 5 are the possible payments. But see, as the king, hello.
Do you mind if I join you for the...
Absolutely fine. I'll give you a copy of it. Here you are. All right. You come in the middle of the story, so you'll have to just bear with me.
Sorry.
Okay. And he is yes. And he says he should be put to death for doing that. Okay. And the Navi says, that's you. You're the one who did this, and you should be put to death for doing this. I gave you so much. I brought you up from nothing to being king of Israel. I gave you the royalty. I gave you everything, success. I gave you so many wives. You've already had 6 wives. You could have had as many as you wanted. Well, not as many as you wanted, but at least another 12 you wanted. Instead, you took this poor wife of this man, and you're going to have terrible consequences for what you've done. We got up to there. Right? And there's really one more puzzle we have to do before we can go into understand that. That's the story so far. Okay? And soon, after we do the next puzzle, we'll talk about all the questions on the story, and hopefully we'll have time to answer. Okay, so we're on chapter
Page 24.
page 24. Thank you very much. Okay?
24 already?
Page
Yeah.
24, right.
Pasuk Yud.
So, Pasuk Yud. Yes, it looks like, if we read the Pasuk properly, it looks like that David is not actually being blamed or held to account for all the things that he did. He actually did 3 things, we would say. 3 things it would seem that he did. The least seems to be held on him the most. The 3 things is, first of all, he slept with this married woman, right? Once on a one-night fling, what do I call it? Okay, that was one thing. Terrible Aveira, which deserves a death sentence. Right? I mean, the court wouldn't kill him because there were no witnesses to it, right? But God doesn't need witnesses. God gives out the punishments that people deserve, irrespective of witnesses. Okay? All right. That was one thing he did. What?
I have a question. Is Bathsheba the woman that he took when he was very old?
No. That's someone else entirely different. Woman. Right? That's just a hot water bottle that he had later on.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a different story. That's a different one.
Yeah.
This is a married woman who he had an illicit relationship, what we usually call adultery. Right?
It was really like.
Well, we'll see.
Wow.
Well, we're patient, right? We're going to hear the whole story. That's the story. There's certainly the impression you get from the story. Okay, and what else did he do? He killed her husband, right? That's the second thing, which is usually called murder, and that's also a capital crime we shouldn't get killed for. Okay. The third thing was that he married her at the end of the story, right? So we, I think, in our superficial reading of the story, would assume that that's the least of the problems. When he married her, she was already a widow, and so what's the big deal? And yet, if you read the words of the prophet, it looks like that's what's really bothering him. Because it's those words that it says, and what David did was evil in the eyes of Hashem. And that's at that point in the story that the prophet comes and gives him what for. And he says to him, the last pasuk, Madua, let's read it again, pasuk test. You got a copy? You don't have? We've run out of copies this week. All right? Madua, pasuk teisha. Why? Bazisef deva Hashem. Why did you despise the word of God? La'asei sarah be'einai, to do evil, that which was evil in my eyes, in God's eyes. What did you do? What did you do so terrible? Well, let's see. Es Uriah Achiti ikisa b'cheret. You struck Uriah the Hittite, that was the husband of this woman, with the sword. Well, that sounds terrible. Okay, but that's one thing, right? Ves ishtei lakachta l'cha leisha, and you took his wife as a wife. Now that's the thing he did at the end, right? The actual fact that he slept with Uriah's wife, it doesn't say that. God doesn't say anything about that. It doesn't say kibasa el Aish Uriah, which is what I would have said. I would have said that's the worst thing. That's the first thing that he did. And that's not mentioned at all. What's mentioned is he killed Uriah, which was point number 2, and then he took his wife. And then it says, it repeats point number 1 again, which is, well, it's more point number 2. There's 2 and 3, of 1, 2 and 3, 2 and 3 are mentioned, and then 2 is mentioned again. And it says, and you killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. So Chazal are very bothered by this repetition. Why did it say he killed him twice? He only killed him once. Right? And Chazal say that what the Navi wants to say, although it wasn't nice that you had Uriah killed, it's not really the biggest problem. Because in actual fact, you didn't kill him. You just killed in battle. That's what he says. Yeah, you killed him, but in the end it says, and you killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. And the reason why the Navi is saying that again is to make it clear that isn't really the biggest problem over here. You had him killed because he wasn't killed by you, he was killed in war, right? So what the Navi is saying is the real problem is you took his wife, which in our minds were the least of the problems, but that's what we have to train ourselves to try and understand why God thinks different to us.
It wasn't mentioned because that thing was like, that was an emotion and...
Well, we'll see. That's your answer, right? Yeah, but at the moment we've just put forward the questions before we discuss the answers, okay? That's the question. Why wasn't it mentioned? We didn't say why it wasn't mentioned, right? But that's your suggestion, Daniel, okay? Maybe. But I don't know. I think that even emotions like that, yeah, okay, you did something on the spur of the moment, yeah, but what you did was a terrible sin. You just had sexual relations with a married woman. That's like serious. No,
Maybe
isn't that serious? Maybe what?
Maybe because maybe if he had done Shuvah.
Well, he hasn't done Shuvah yet. He's only just got it over the head, right? He hasn't done it. He doesn't even know he did anything wrong yet. The Navi comes. This is the first awareness that what he did was bad, which is also shocking. How can a person not realize that that's bad?
Yeah,
How can anyone like David HaMelech think that what he did wasn't an awful crime? Okay. Not only does David not know it's an awful, it looks like even God doesn't consider it an awful crime, and God just says, "Well, I don't know. We didn't even mention it." That's not shocking. Okay. Okay. Yes.
So why when killing the husband? What? So just because it was with the sword of the Ammonite, he still knew that.
Okay, it's a good question. I'm not looking for answers. We'll discuss the answers soon. At the moment, we're just piling on the question.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about answers very soon, right? But I just want to make the situation even worse, more and more.
Yeah.
Okay? We'll get the answers very soon. Okay? All right. I'm just pointing out, you see from the text. What you do with that is another question. This text seems to be saying that. You killed him, but it wasn't really you. Okay. But now it gives him a list of punishments. Ve'ata. Now, lo tasur cherev mi beischa. Sword will not be removed from your house. That means there will be constant war. Sword will not be removed from your house. Ad olam, forever. What?
What?
That's what it says. Right?
What about, like...
What's your problem? It didn't
Shiur?
happen.
Wait, is that why
Wait,
we're
you're not at the end of the story. You can't ask a question again end of the story. The Aker. Why? Ki bezisani. Because you despised me. Vatikach es Aish Uriah Hachiti, and you took the wife of Uriah Hachiti, Lios l'chala isha, to be a wife. So it's clear, beyond any shadow of doubt, in my opinion, that the only one of those three events that's being held against him is the last one. Because now, when the prophet summarizes of why he's being punished, he only mentions one of the three things. It doesn't say that you took Uriah's wife and slept with her, which was the first thing. It doesn't say you have Uriah bumped up in the front line. It doesn't say that. It only says because you took his wife as a wife, which is what he did at the end of the story. Right? The first thing was he didn't take Uriah's wife as a wife. He just slept with her. That's not taking someone as a wife. No, what he took her for a wife is the end of the story. After Uriah was already dead and she was a widow, that's what the God is annoyed about. And that's why he's going to be punished. So that, of course, begs a serious discussion. Why is that the worst of the three things he did? It doesn't sound like the least of the three things. We can't even see what's such a big deal about it. Big deal? Like, so what? She was a widow, right? She would have had this baby to look after on her own. And so he took her. It's very nice, so considerate, and he took her into his house instead of leaving this woman to look after this kid on her own. You know, a single mother going to bring this kid up for the rest of her life. No one's going to marry her now. Right? She becomes pregnant. Nobody knows how she became pregnant when her husband's away in battle. You know, who's going to want to marry her? So David's a big sadly, and that's what's held against him. Get it? So that's a bit problematic. So that's what we're going to discuss. And we haven't really finished it yet. Let's carry a little bit more before we discuss the answers. I don't know where we have to get to. Okay. Hashem, so says the Lord. Hineni make him alecha ra'mi beisecha. I will establish, hineni, behold, I will make him establish, stand up. Alecha upon you ra'a, evil, mi beisecha, from your own house. That means your own house will stand up against you. Your members of your own family will be your enemies. That's punishment number one. I mean, there was a general one, is that sword will not be removed from your house forever. That's very general. Now there's more details. Okay? One is that there will be enemies from your own family. And I will take your wives in front of your eyes. I will give them to your comrade. Means the guy who's going to be established from your family to rebel against you, he will take your wives in front of your eyes. And he will sleep with your wives. In front of this sun. Means it will be public knowledge. I don't think it means actually in view of the public, right? But it's a way of saying everyone will know what this guy is doing to your wives. Okay?
So, in front of the sun?
In front of the sun. That just means...
Where's this?
Le'enei Hashemesh, in the eyes of the sun. Bottom line, last 2 words, last 3 words. Le'enei Hashemesh azes, in the front or the eyes of this sun. God, that's a bit of a strange way to say it, but that's what it means, right? It means, and it will be well known, public knowledge, that this rebel who from your own family who is rebelling against you will sleep with your wives, and this will be a punishment to David.
In the eyes of like the sun?
In front, oh yeah, whatever. I'd say it. You wouldn't say that in English, but we're not here to analyse the poetic
Maybe outside.
aspects of the verse. What we're trying to do
What
is,
happened outside?
Okay.
who said it's okay?
Oh.
This is a punishment. When people kill other people in battle, it's not okay. It's a punishment to King David. What do you mean? How is it okay?
But this is like, but this is not, this is a chet by itself. You can punish someone by giving them a chet. Like,
This is
by
God.
greater
God is
chet.
giving
That's why I said when someone kills you in battle.
No,
That's,
but
one
it's
second.
different.
When someone kills you in battle, is that an avera for the other guy?
Well, if he's my enemy, no. But
Well, he's killed you.
No, if he's a Jew.
Yeah, if he's a
then
Jew.
Yes.
Okay, fine.
But it won't. But
No.
it's not
When
the
anyone
same
does
thing.
anything that hurts you, it's a chet for him.
But if Hashem
1 second.
says-
When Pharaoh made the Jews slaves, right? Was that okay for him to do? Is it an avera for a goy to take someone and make him into a slave?
I don't know.
No.
No.
Wait, yes?
To take an innocent guy in the street and turn him into a
An
slave?
innocent guy in the
I didn't say buy him in the slave market. No, to take a Jew off the street and turn him into a slave. Take a goy. What's the goy?
Come on.
What I'm saying, your whole philosophy is not true.
But-
What I'm saying, the answer to your question,
like-
the answer to your question is straight. The answer to your question is straightforward. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't force anyone to do anything, right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't force Pharaoh to turn the Jews into slaves either, right? But he tempted him to do it, and he fell for it. So when God predicted to Abraham, your descendants will be slaves in Egypt for 400 years, right? He wasn't forcing anyone to do anything. He just was put the circumstance that Pharaoh would be tempted, and he did it. So the same thing. One of the descendants or someone from David's family is going to, God's just going to predict it because God knows what's going to happen, right? But he's not forcing anyone to do a sin, get it? He's just tempting someone from David's family to rebel and then putting this idea in his head, maybe it'd be a good idea to rape all David's wives, great idea, oh, I better do it. So now the guy then decides to do it, right? You get what I'm saying?
Doesn't he know? Doesn't.
Yeah, God knows everything, so what? Man, we're not, this isn't a
He
philosophy
knows
class.
he knows the decision that they're gonna make though.
So that's it. So what's your question? How do I deal with God's knowledge with the fact the person has a choice? Okay, so ask that to your philosophy teacher. You had that question before you came to this class, right? It doesn't do what I'm saying. The fact that God knows what people are going to choose, you knew before this class, right? The fact that God says, I'm going to punish you, right? And this is the punishment going to be that someone is going to fight against you, doesn't take away that guy's free choice, right? And even if you would say it does take his free choice away, that just means the guy won't get punished for it. Correct? Let's say this rebel, who's going to be from David's house, had no free choice because God forced him into it, right? So then he would now have a choice, that's all. Okay, so he won't get punished for it. You see?
I see, but we with the example of the enemy chas v'shalom, of course, not going to happen. But that I can understand why it's more problematic. But in the nice, it's as if Hashem is saying, and I will do that. There will be people not keeping Shabbat.
Right.
It's like how,
What's
like
the big deal? So he can do what he wants. What's your question?
I see.
Can these people be punished for it? Well, if they had no choice, they can't be punished for it. If they had a choice, then God's just saying, I'm telling you, these people are going to do that. But I can take...
But why would God want it? Why would God
Well, he doesn't want it.
that someone?
Why do you think he wants it? He wants this guy to be punished.
No, because he's saying that many mekim alecha.
One thing, does God want babies to die?
I'm assuming, yeah.
Really? He really wants them to die? But isn't that bad?
There is-
Everyone says, isn't that bad that babies
In
die?
our eyes, it seems bad.
So it's the same thing. Why is it different? No? Yeah. But I think the real answer is that God doesn't take this choice away. He didn't force anyone to do anything.
But the fact is that God
just
is
saying.
creating the reality where
No, he's creating
where-
temptations. He creates temptation the whole time. He gives you temptation and me temptation. That's not forcing you to do anything. Right?
Free choice.
That's it. That's the question is, if this guy had decided not to do it,
So someone
Then
else,
what would have happened?
No, someone else.
So that's a question on every prediction that God makes. Every prediction God makes, well, that means the guy doesn't have any choice.
But maybe that's kind of. I'm not thinking like. So maybe if everybody would not want to do it because they have free choice, maybe someone without free choice would come and do it, and then you have people who are.
So in the end, it would work out.
crazy. Because this is what Hashem wanted.
Hashem wanted David to be punished, and David needed to be punished in a way that he would get what he deserved. And the deserved punishment was that just like he raped somebody else's wife, someone's going to rape his wife. Right? Now, will that guy get punished for it? Yeah. I mean, I thought the really philosophical question is, what did his wife do to deserve this?
No, yeah.
That's another question. Okay, but that doesn't bother me. I mean, yes, it does bother me, but it doesn't bother me because I don't know. I don't know his wives. I don't know what they've done. It's not part. I don't have to be privy. That's a different question. I don't have to judge God and know why God does things. God has all his calculations, right? That's not the issue here. Isn't what did they do? I don't know. Maybe they burnt the cholent. Maybe they spoke lashon hara. There's a million different things they could have done to deserve this, right? That's not part of the story. Here we're focusing. What did David do to deserve that his wife should get raped? To agree. Now I don't know who's being punished more when a person's wife gets raped. Is it the woman or the man? I imagine it's both. Probably it's the woman feels it much more painful than the man does, right? But whenever something happens to someone, whoever's affected by that deserves it. So God's saying, my calculation with these women, that's my business. I'll work that out with them, right? But, why does God? I don't know, you understand? But he's saying, this David, you're going to have the following punishment because of what you've done.
So basically, the mitzvahs are for us, but in God's realm, the rest of the things, God can decide whatever he wants, pretty much. That's from what I understand. Which makes sense, obviously.
What do you mean the mitzvahs are for us?
What do you say?
I'm not sure what you're saying. The mitzvahs are for us, but...
Meaning, but when it comes to things, even if it's against what maybe God told us to do, God can still decide that this will be things that happen. Meaning he's not bound to the way of the mitzvah.
He doesn't have to stop people from doing Averas.
But
He's allowed to
here
put
he's saying
temptation in the way of people to do Averas, which is what the whole life's about. Just like he gives you temptation. Now he can then say that I'm going to put temptation in front of someone which will then serve you as a punishment. To say, this is for sure going to happen, right, is a good question. How does God know for sure what is going to happen when he has a temptation and he could decide not to do it? Right? So one way was to say, well, okay, that's the question on every temptation you have. That God knows what you're going to do and he still gives you free will. Could be there are certain circumstances where God takes free will away. Like the simple meaning of the story of Pharaoh. It says God hardens Pharaoh's heart in the story of the Exodus. Simply that's meant to mean that Pharaoh wanted to let them go. God didn't want them to go yet. So he hardened Pharaoh's heart, which is usually understood to mean that he took his free will away. There's other ways to understand it. Why does God do that? Because sometimes that's for the bigger good, God will do that. Now, if you're going to say that this rebel is going to have his free will taken away, then you have to say that he's not going to get punished for it. If that would be your conclusion. Okay, let's continue the story. So that's punishment number one, okay? Which is, there's a rebel from the family going to rise up against him and sleep with his wives. Okay. Ki ata asita basete, because you did in secret. But I will do this thing, means this punishment, neged kol Yisrael. Neged means in front of in this sense. In front of all Israel. Means all the Jews will know about it. Neged Shemesh, in front of the sun. In broad daylight, as you would say in English. Okay. So that's... I suppose it's two punishments. Yes, two punishments. There is three aspects to it. One is there'll be constant war in your family, constant war in your kingdom, forever. Second one is one of your own family will rise up against you, and he will take your wives in very public way. So how does David react? I sinned to God.
Wow.
Right? Natan, he's the prophet. That's the name of the prophet who's speaking to him. I have sinned to God. Notice there is a samach, meaning there's a new paragraph in the middle of a sentence. It's unusual, but it's not so unusual. It's very, very uncommon in the Chumash. It's more common in the Navi to have a new paragraph in the middle of a sentence, which you don't have in English, right? In the Navi, it seems to be telling you to take a pause. It's even though there's not, linguistically a pause in the text, but there was a pause in real life. It means before you carry on the story, take a deep breath. And that's what it looks like. Even though in the middle of a sentence, then nothing speaks. It looks to me that the author wants you to realize that David had nothing else to say. Right? Like, as if Nathan is waiting, what else do you have to say, David? Do you have anything else to say in your defense? And David has nothing to say. David just says, I sinned. Unlike another very great king.
So
exactly, very good David. When Saul sinned, he kept on giving excuses. Originally he said, I didn't do anything, and I did exactly what God asked me to do. And it goes on and on and on. Eventually he capitulates and says, yeah, you're right. He's arguing with the prophet. He says, you're right. I said, but, right? He immediately says, but, right? And that, I think the apostle is trying to show the difference. David didn't try to find excuses. He said, I sinned, and that's silence. That's why there's a samach, a break. There's no, right? I think that's what it's trying to stress. David, Gam Hashem he'evir chatoscha lo tamus. Also, God has removed your sin, you shall not die. Right, so that's the point you said before. Maybe David did tshuva. Yes, at this point, David has accepted the fact that what he didn't argue, you're right, it was a mistake, I shouldn't have done it, it was a sin. Right? So at this point, he's being forgiven somewhat. And that's why I answered your question, how come where's Mashiach all come from? Right? Because in the end he did tshuva. And so therefore, this curse or these things are going to be commuted to something less than was originally predicted. So long as this was the threat, if you don't do tshuva, right? I mean, didn't say those words. This was at least his first stage, the initial stage of teshuva is to recognize you did something wrong. After that, there's lots of other stages. We'll talk about that. But the first stage is to admit you did something wrong. We're not trying to find excuses for yourself. Because so long as you're trying to find excuses for yourself, you're never going to correct it. Okay? So that's the first point. David does that. And so the Navi says, right, you won't die. Although he was told originally that he'd given his own death sentence when he told that guy should die for that theft, right, stealing that poor sheep, right? And the Navi says, but because you accept that you did wrong, well, FS means but. There's a big but over here. Yes, you won't die. However, FS. Here it means but, although FS in modern Hebrew means zero or nothing. But here it means but. Ki niyetz ni'atzta es oivei Hashem, because you have angered the enemies of God. Now, I think that's a euphemism for saying God. He didn't anger the enemies of God, he angered God. Right? But it's a way that it's used in Hebrew text to, like we talk about blasphemy. In Hebrew, what's that called, blasphemy? It's called Birkas Hashem, blessing God. Because we don't even want to use the word, right? We don't even want to describe the crime in its real name because it's such an awful crime. So that we have a euphemism of, we're using the opposite. We're blessing God, but we really mean like in speech marks, right? So it looks like that's what the Navi is trying to say. Because you angered God's enemies, right? Really mean you angered God. Therefore, with this thing, also the child that will be born to you, because don't forget that she was pregnant and she'd just given birth to this child, mut yamut, he will die.
What's the kid?
The kid's good question. There you go. That's the same philosophical question. What other people do right? You know, I don't know. I'm not here to judge God. Maybe he didn't do anything. You know, just when people die means it's a punishment. Maybe it's the biggest thing that could happen to him. He died and now he's going to go straight to heaven. You know what I mean? Dying isn't the punishment necessarily. If you die in pain, I hear if you suffer. A kid can die a cot death. That's it.
You could argue that had David not sinned, the child wouldn't exist in the first place.
Yeah.
Fair.
That's completing the idea. The child, on the contrary, the child lived and died and then went to heaven, and he's happily ever after. Yeah. You know, but you agree. I think you agree. If the child suffered, that would be more problematic. Why a child died? I mean, children do sometimes. Darlene would die and suffer as well. That's another thing you have to deal with. Okay, that will deal with our philosophical questions some other point, right? Yeah. You here? Okay, but Again, that was a question that's unrelated to this question, class, because you knew there was a thing called Kodesh before this class, right? And you had a problem with that all along, so you still got a problem with it. Okay. But it's certainly a punishment to David that the child dies. Because what did the kid do? I don't know, it's a question all Kodesh. What did the kid do? Right? It's a Gilgal. Right? Whatever you want to answer to that philosophical question, you can answer that still the same. It didn't become worse in this class. All right? So he's going to die, and basically that's the end of the story. And then it starts. The child dies, and then there's a rebel in the family, and then there's a civil war, and then it goes on and on. And right, the next 3, 4, 5 chapters are all about the consequences of this story. But I think at this point we can take a break. And just very briefly, when we've discussed the story, I want to very briefly go over the questions on the story. Besides the obvious questions, some of the very, very obvious questions is, how come David did this in the first place? Right? I mean, those are not really questions on the story. They are, but, you know, we have such a where's my paper here? I have this paper down. What happened to it? Here it is. Yeah? Like our picture of King David is so different from this story. He was picked by God to be the king because of his righteousness, of his greatness, his superior spiritual qualities, and he's on the roof and he sees this woman, he can't control himself. Okay? But that doesn't bother me so much because being a man, so I know I also have a Yetzer Hara, no? So yes, King David was a much, much bigger tzaddik than I am. It's not like, it's not a question on the story, it's just that people have a Yetzer Hara and they do have errors. That doesn't really bother me, that question. But it needs explanation, and it's not bothersome so much. Right? There are questions. What bothers me is the whole story. So many things that don't make sense. What's David doing going to bed in the afternoon? Now, it's true, some people do, but why is that a part of the story? Why doesn't it just say he was going for a walk on the roof? Why does it tell me that he woke up from his bed? Why is that an important detail in the story that he woke up from his siesta? Question number 1. Question number 2, right? How could she have been bathing in a way that David could see? She knows. Every woman knows who can see into her shower room, right? And therefore they have curtains that they close, or they have a room with opaque windows, right? No one can see them, and this woman apparently could be seen from David's roof. So why was she doing that? Question number 2. Question number 3. When they come back and they say, he finds out who this woman is, they said, we're talking about many of these questions, isn't this Bathsheba? Well, that sounds like that David knows her. Yeah, and we said, why? Well, how does David know this woman? Where does David know this woman? Because she's the wife of one of his generals. Well, David knew all the generals' wives. Like, they were on first name terms. Like, they used to go to parties with the soldiers. Like, it's not the way you imagine David HaMelech that we'd spend these days, right? So how does he know this woman? Okay. Question number 4. She comes to his house, and then it says she is purified from her impurity, which means that she wasn't a nida. And our question was, big deal. Why is that important? She was a married woman. I mean, if she'd been a nida, you wouldn't have had relations with her? Is that what you're telling me? That might be true. But the fact that she was a married woman, that didn't bother him. The fact that she was a nida, you know what I mean? Is that what it's saying? Is it really important to know that fact that she wasn't a nida? It sounds like if she'd been a nida, David wouldn't have such a terrible avera. But with having relations with a married woman is a million times worse than having relations with a nida, right? You understand that? Having relations with a married woman gets the death sentence, right? Having relations with a nida is a terrible avera, but you don't get a death sentence for it. Right? So it's obviously much, much, much worse. So it's like overkill. I don't know what the word is. Overkill or whatever. It's unnecessary to add that detail. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, why is Uriah suspicious of David? It certainly seems from the story the fact he refused and that he even swore that he wouldn't go back home. Right? He makes up a whole story, so how can I go back home? All my friends, comrades are out in the field suffering with the deprivation of war, and I'm going to go home to sleep with my wife, right? Like, I mean, it could be that was his real reason, but it's hard to believe a guy would refuse orders, even if that was a real reason. The king tells you to go back home, you don't go back home. Like, it makes sense that if he didn't want to cover up what David was trying to do, David was trying to cover up this affair, and he didn't want to be part of that. So even though he's refusing orders, but that makes sense. You slept with my wife, you think I'm going to cover up your sleep with my wife. But why did he think that he'd done that? So the only weak point we said, because David told him to go home and sleep with your wife, which was very strange. Why a king of the David HaMelech's stature would speak like such gutter language to one of his generals, go home and sleep with your wife. Like, no, like, just don't do that. Nobody speaks like that. So that got the bells ringing in Uriah's mind. Oh, what's going on? must be, he saw my wife because he can see our bathroom from his roof, and he must have seen my wife, and he must have slept with her, and she's pregnant. Come on, that's like so far-fetched that Uriah wouldn't make such a suspicion. Okay, that was the next question. Next question was, how does King David justify killing Uriah? See, in the end, it looks like a bit better, because in the end, Uriah was just killed in a dangerous mission. And unfortunately, when you go to war, there are casualties. And that's clear, that's what David said. Give back the message that Yoav shouldn't feel bad about this whole story, because it happens. In war, there are casualties. But in the initial story, it looks like that David asked Yoav to put him in a specifically dangerous place, and everybody else should withdraw, leaving Uriah on his own. Now, the reason why David wanted that, because David didn't want anyone else to die. There was one thing killing Uriah, but what the other innocent soldiers have to suffer for. But in the end, the story says it didn't actually work out like that, because there was a very important mission, it was very dangerous, and Yoav picked Uriah, knowing that David wanted that, and actually a few people got killed. It wasn't just Uriah. So the fact they went out to this mission isn't held against anybody. So in the end, David didn't actually kill him. But what's David's justification for putting him in this dangerous place, which was an unnecessary battle? The proof is unnecessary because everyone else is going to withdraw. So obviously they're not actually trying to win. So that needs, that's... In the end, it didn't happen. So you can't be held against you because I tried to kill you. You understand? I tried to pull the trigger and nothing happened. Okay. It didn't happen in the end. So we can't hold it against David for murder, because you didn't murder him. He was just doing his regular job, and there were a few soldiers who got killed. Right? But still, you have to know what's going on in David's mind. Yeah. I mean, I know what's going on in his mind, but that sounds like really bad. And it doesn't seem to appear later on in the story. Okay, that's the next question. Yeah. So we asked other questions. Why wasn't he punished for taking Bathsheba in the first place? This is a big question, right? There's a Mishnah that says somewhere, I don't know where it is, I think it's in Saita somewhere, that a guy who has an adulterous relation with a woman is forbidden to marry this woman afterwards. She's forbidden to stay with her husband if she does this willingly, that's adultery, okay? But she's also forbidden forever to marry the adulterer, okay? Now, it's possible that what David did was an Aveira, because he did marry her. It's not the only Aveira David did in the story, right? So, and it would be the least of the Aveiras. But the problem is, how come the Navi doesn't tell him you have to get divorced? We think that David is a big tzaddik. That's our assumption, right? That's our starting assumption. Okay, tzaddikim can make mistakes as well, but that's only on a one-off. You don't live a life of sin if you're a tzaddik. You regret, you do tshuva, you try to make amends, right? But here, the rest of his life, we live with this woman. Not only that, she's the mother of the continual dynasty of King David. She's the mother of Shlomo HaMelech, you understand? And Shlomo HaMelech is the one who built the Beis HaMikdash, and all the future kings of David come from, the Melech HaMashiach comes from this illicit relationship. Now, it didn't come from the initial relationship, because that kid died. But the whole marriage was halachically forbidden. And God says, I love this kid, he's my favorite one, talking about Shlomo HaMelech. He even calls him Yedidia, the beloved of God. Like, how do you rationalize that somebody should be considered the beloved one of God when he's born from such a relation? Look, I don't say guys can overcome things, right? That's true. But he hasn't done anything yet, he's just a baby. Right? He couldn't have worked at overcoming the negative aspect of being born from this forbidden relationship when he was a baby. So that's something, maybe you've got, but that's definitely something that needs ironing out. Okay, let's go on. Oh, another thing was, it says this was evil in the eyes of God, implying that nobody else would have noticed this was bad. And this was murder and adultery, and nobody thinks this is bad, and King David doesn't think this is bad. Just because he did it doesn't mean that he thinks it's good. It means he had a temptation, he did it. But don't you realize this is bad? No, God realized it was bad. Eventually, the prophet manages to convince him, oh yeah, I sinned. But the text says it was evil in the eyes of God, implying that it wasn't so obvious. Okay, and the last point was a nice nuance. When she finds out her husband died, the text calls her two different words for Hebrew for husband. One is Isha, which means her man, and Ba'ala, which means her owner. Right? Both are Hebrew ways of saying husband. No, I don't think there's any other way to say husband. One is Isha, means her man, as in Ish. Baal means an owner. Ba'ala is her owner. And it changes in mid-sentence, it changes from one to the other, which we'd like to answer. So, a lot of ink has been spilt on trying to iron out this story because it's a really serious story. The first is a statement which Chazal say, you have to know this, I think it's a Gemara on Shabbos, I don't know exactly where all the sources are, I've written them out somewhere. The Gemara on Shabbos says as follows, and it's usually misunderstood. And that's why I want to get this message. Chazal says as follows, Kol ha'omer David chata eni alotaya. Chazal means the Talmud, in discussing this, says, anyone who says that David sinned is making a big mistake. That's what it says. Kol ha'omer David chata eni alotaya is only mistaken. You're completely mistaken if you say that. So, most people say that in English when they discussed it. Chazal say that David didn't sin, right? So I say, well, if David didn't sin, why did the Navi say that he deserves to die? Why does his child die? Why is there a civil war? Why does you'll find out his daughter gets raped, his son gets killed, there's a civil war, there's his wives are raped in public, he didn't sin, and all that is a punishment for not sinning. Right? Can't you imagine what the punishment for yes sinning is? You understand? So Chazal obviously don't mean that David didn't sin. So what are they saying? So my Rebbe said, the Chazal are very careful to the way they word. They didn't say David didn't sin. It says, if you say that he sinned, you're making a mistake. Because when you say the word sin, what you mean by that is not what's going on in the story. Yes, David did something awful, terrible, that he deserves all these, but he actually initially deserved to die for it, as he ruled for himself. And then he said, you did tshuva, okay, it gets commuted to less serious punishment, yeah, with awful consequences, right? But it's still wrong for you to say that he sinned. Kol ha'omer, you say it because you don't. It's not what you mean. It's not what you mean by sin. When you imagine this story, right? You imagine this story as if you were going down on the light railway line, you saw this pretty girl, you follow her into a house, you go into a house, and you have an affair with her. And that's what David did, right? And then you actually see her husband just come in, you take out your rifle, right? And then you go off to the shul and you marry her next week. That's how you see the story, and that's what you think happened, okay? So Chazal think you're making a big mistake, if that's what you think happened. But it's wrong to say he didn't do anything wrong. Okay, that's point number one, okay? Chazal's take on the story, there's something else. The second point, they're not all related to these points, but they also answer the questions, right? The second point is Chazal in Ksuvas say that there was a custom in David's army to divorce your wife before you went out to battle. It started already earlier in times of Shaul, but that wasn't a common custom. We had a whole story that Shaul, when David went to see his brothers who were fighting, and just before he killed Goliath, he told David, go and take from your brothers something. It's a very difficult word to understand. Chazal read that as he came up with this idea. Your brothers are going out to battle, right? They could be missing in action, and then their wives are what we call an aguna, right? It's the most awful position for a woman to be, for anybody to be, an aguna. An aguna means a woman who doesn't know if her husband is dead. And if a woman knows her husband is dead, she has evidence that her husband is dead, then she can remarry. If she doesn't know her husband is dead, then she's stuck. She doesn't have a husband because her husband has come home. She can't remarry because she doesn't know that he's died. That's called an aguna. An aguna means a woman who is anchored, as in Hebrew, an ogin. An ogin is an anchor. So a woman is anchored, she's stuck, she can't do anything. Okay?
What's her anchor again?
An ogin.
Okay.
Ayin vav gimel nun. So an aguna is the feminine, an anchoree, anchoress, we're going to say. A woman who's anchored is an aguna. Okay? So, yes?
For like evidence, they would need like the body and stuff, right? If they don't find the body, it's not
Correct.
enough if they don't just come back.
Yeah, for sure, exactly.
Oh, okay.
Because lots of people, maybe he doesn't like his wife, right? He went off somewhere else, she's not divorced. Or maybe he's injured, maybe he's daydreaming somewhere, he's gone crazy. Lots of things can happen in battle, right? Unfortunately, happened after the Holocaust was a whole big thing, right? People went off to Auschwitz and never came back. But that doesn't mean they're not alive. My uncle had a brother, my auntie's husband, right? His whole family, there were a group of boys who were all in Auschwitz, right? And one brother after the war said, I'm alive, but I'm not telling you where I am. So they received a letter from the older brother who didn't want any more connection with his family. He wanted them to know that he was still alive. So they never found out where he was. Had nothing to do with him. Where is he? I mean, he's not alive anymore, right? But, people, yes, they went to people were pulled out the last minute from gas chambers, right? And, if you'd go by the evidence, those who went left were killed, and those who went right were saved. Not necessarily some of the people who went left were also saved. So that's the whole big to-do. After the war, the rabbis, this was a big thing. Can these women get remarried, and can they not get remarried? So that's the whole thing. Anyway, Shaul Yishai, that was David's father, was worried about this, and he came up with the following idea. Before you go out to battle, give your wife a divorce. Now, you'll make a condition that if you don't come back within 30 days of the ceasefire, then the get will be effective. Right? It seems from the commentaries there's a bit of a debate whether the get will be effective retroactively, or the get will be effective from 30 days after the ceasefire. It makes a big difference in this story, right? But for our purpose, let's assume that it's going to work retroactively, which you can do that. I give you a get today in front of two witnesses. It's not yours. You're not divorced yet. But if I don't come back within 30 days after the ceasefire, then you will be divorced from today. You can do that.
Even if they know that he's alive?
Well, okay, you add that condition if you want. If there's no way of knowing if I'm alive and I don't come back, whatever. Okay, you could add that. You could say even if you know he's alive, whatever. You can have whatever conditions you want, right? Okay, but that's what they used to do. This was Yishai's idea, and David apparently, according to Chazal's tradition, this is what David introduced to all his soldiers. Okay, so that puts a whole different light on the story. But it also answers the following question, which you didn't ask. David sees this woman on the roof, and he investigates who she is. What do they say? She's Uriah Hittite's wife. Now he's got that information. So, one second. Now he's got that information, he takes her. And if they'd come up and said something else, what if they say she's single? Snowballer, right? You like her, right? She thinks she's gorgeous. You want to sleep with her. So what difference does it make whose wife she is? The answer is that she's a soldier's wife. That means she's actually divorced. So it's not such a big avera. Understand? If it'd been somebody else's wife, the cook's wife, right, or the secretary's wife, that would be the problem. David wouldn't have dreamt of sleeping with a married woman, right? That's Aish. That's one of the three cardinal sins, right? But since it's Uriah Hittite's wife, and he's a soldier, so they're not technically. Now, it's not nice. Don't get me wrong, not nice, right? Because when you give a get to your wife before you go out to battle, the intention is that you're both going to be faithful. You're not going to go off with some chicks you meet in the war, and she's not going to go off with the neighbor, right? That's understood, right? But technically, it's not Aish, it's not adultery, right? That's Chazal's big take on the story. That's why the Pasuk points out, wasn't she a nida? Her husband was out of town, so there was no need to go to the mikveh, right? So the Pasuk points out that she wasn't a nida. Why did she go to the mikveh if your husband was out of town? Because in those days, you had to go to mikveh for other reasons. Because if you want to eat truma, or you wanted to eat the korban, right, you couldn't eat that if you were a nida, right? So nowadays, nida is only a problem of, to be able to have relations with the husband. In those days, it has other reasons as well. So the Pasuk points out, David checked out first that she'd gone to the mikveh, right? Otherwise, he would never have done this in a million years, right? So we've reduced it from being a serious capital crime to, what is it now?
Not something not nice.
Well, it's more than that. It's like having sexual relations out of marriage. But okay, I'm not saying that's great, but it's reduced it a millionfold to much less serious sin, right? That could be biblical, but it's not so bad. It could be rabbinic. We've discussed this before, right? Whether having sexual relations out of marriage, the extent of it, but it doesn't compare or contrast to anything near adultery. Okay, that's one important factor that, but the rest of the story is still the same thing. David's still embarrassed about having done it. He still wants to cover it up because he's worried that if it gets, like you said, you weren't here for this bit, right? If it gets out, we're worried about the awful. It's not just getting a bad name. It's the awful Chilul Hashem, and it's a desecration of God's name that David would do such a thing, and that God would pick a king who'd done such a thing, right? So that's why David wants it. Also, it could be instability to the nation, as we said, if this actually becomes well known. So that it makes sense why he wants to cover it. But those so far are the first 2 points. The first point is that Chazal say it's a big mistake to think that David sinned in the sense that you think he sinned. And the first point to understand that is that she wasn't actually married. She wasn't a niddah, as it points out, but she wasn't even a niddah, but she wasn't married because they used to divorce their wives before they went out to battle. And that takes that aspect of the story. I think we have to stop here because it's 5:30. Tomorrow we'll carry on with other points that answer all the other questions. Okay, what's tomorrow? Tomorrow is we're going to the beach. Anyone wants to go to the beach, right? Tomorrow.